Eagles Entertainment.
The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA Roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 21st pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and it is an exciting time right now for people that are into the NFL Draft. We are right on the doorstep of the Senior Bowl. The underclassmen declarations are in. Pretty close to knowing who's in and who's out for this NFL Draft. Obviously, there is plenty of NFL news to talk about as well, but let's get into today's show. First up, we've got Pick 6. Ben Fennell and I go through some of the biggest news surrounding the NFL Draft and look ahead to this mock draft from Seth Golina of Pro Football Focus and talk about the picks that would create the biggest uproar of their respective fan bases. Of course, we'll also look at who Seth has the Eagles selecting at number 6 overall. Afterwards, we take a look at the blueprint where Joe Goodberry, who is as good as it gets when it comes to being a resource for the Cincinnati Bengals, the team with the 5th overall pick and selecting just ahead of the Eagles. So we catch up with Joe and talk about the draft philosophy in Cincinnati and who might make sense for them when late April arrives here in a few months. Afterwards, we catch up. This will be a fun one. Mr. Relevant this week with Dan Shonka, longtime NFL scout who is in charge of player personnel for the East-West Shrine Bowl. Now, that game was supposed to be taking place this week. In fact, normally, as I record this, we're Wednesday early afternoon, that I would be on the field down at the Trop at this point. So obviously a shame that we couldn't go down and make that trip this year. The game was canceled due to COVID-19. But who are some of the players that would have helped themselves the most down in St. Pete? We will cover all of that with Dan, and we are going to cover a lot of names. So make sure you stay tuned for that one later in the show. Before we get there, though, just wanted to get in your ear about jumping onto our Apple Podcast page and doing us the great favor of leaving us a rating and a comment. It could be about anything. Maybe there's a prospect you like, a player you want to know more about. Maybe you want me to stack and rank certain players at a specific position. Maybe you've got a mock draft you want us to read. Whatever it is, just go leave a comment over on that page. It really helps us give a boost, makes the show more likely to be seen by other fans of the NFL Draft. And as our numbers rise, so does our ability to keep this show rolling twice a week. I appreciate everybody who has taken some time to come through there over on our Apple Podcast page, Stitcher, wherever you listen. Leave us that rating, leave us that comment. That being said, let's get this show going. Let's rip up a mock draft. It's time for Pick 6.
Now it's time for Pick 6.
All right, well, let's get things going here with Pick 6 as I welcome in my friend Ben Fennell. Ben, before we get into this week's mock draft, I wanted to kind of take a look. We had a big announcement. We talked about it a little bit earlier this week with Dane, but Mac Jones officially making the announcement on Tuesday. He will be heading down to Mobile. So here's my question for you. Obviously, the interviews, when you're talking about quarterbacks in particular, the interviews are the most important thing for him going into this process. But is there one thing that he can show on the field, whether it's during the week of practice or during the game itself next Saturday, that would really move the needle for you at all when it comes to him as a prospect?
Well, you just want to see him removed from the Alabama system. You want to see him in a much more naked scenario. That's throwing 1-7 out there and see how he handles non-QB friendly situations. Nothing off play action, nothing off RPO, nothing schemed. Just want to see his kind of general ball placement and accuracy in a very kind of naked nutshell, and then just see how strong his arm is, how the ball pops off his hands, how much touch, and if he could layer throws, a different trajectory and one-on-ones. And then a lot of it's going to be the whiteboard stuff, the in the huddle stuff, the how quickly do you reiterate the verbiage from the coach? How many times does he need to say it? And then you get it to your guys. You're saying a different language all of a sudden in 2 or 3 days. It's a lot of pressure, especially a guy that maybe has been in a similar system for a couple of years. It's all those little things I don't think fans really appreciate. We see the ball fly in the air. We can obviously assess good throws, bad throws, good placement, bad placement. But there's so much more that goes into the quarterback position about managing the team, managing the offense. He has a new system. Can he get other guys lined up properly? There's going to be little route adjustments, things like that. I think are really important this week. And whether it's Mac Jones or Kellen Mond or Jamie Newman, there's a lot of value between the reps as well. So I think there's a lot to take away this week at the quarterback group.
Yeah, I am excited too, just to see what he can do from a, outside the pocket standpoint. Like, I want to see him making some throws on the run, maybe some design rollouts and things of that nature, just to get a sense of, that's because that's one aspect of when we talk about athleticism at the quarterback position that we don't necessarily talk about as much. Is it's not just necessarily about he takes off for a 30-yard scramble or watch him on this zone read for, plus 15 yards. But hey, when they boot out to the right or when they go naked to the left, can he make a throw on the run with accuracy? Does his ball placement falter when he's out in the run? That's a part of being an athlete at the quarterback position as well. I feel like with watching Mac Jones recently, kind of doing a deep dive over the last couple of days into his play, a lot of his best play, everything really, it just happens inside that boxing ring, inside that little cubicle, right behind that nice pocket of the offensive line. I want to be able to see him make some of those throws away from the pocket. That'll be something I'll keep an eye on here next week down in Mobile.
And certainly by design, the coaching staffs, the position coaches, you want to make some of these players uncomfortable. So you're going to maybe ask them to do some things they didn't do in their college season, maybe something that goes against their kind of skill set style. And they just want to see how they handle it both mentally and physically. And that's a big part of the Senior Bowl, of the Combine, of the Pro Days, is to maybe poke and prod and get these guys to do things different that isn't on tape for the last 2, 3, 4 years. So I think Mac Jones maybe doing some mobility drills or maybe some QB run drills, some things to get him out of his comfort zone. Not to say he's going to be a mobile quarterback at the next level,
of course,
but just seeing what he can handle, how it looks, and how he really manages it mentally as well.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the things that I'm most focused on for sure, watching Mac Jones next week.
And real quick, Fran, it's also a funny week because some players are a little too eager to show some of those things they've never done. Hey, I'm a safety. Let me take some reps at off-ball linebacker. And sometimes it's a complete disaster. So you like the kind of tenacity of players trying to, give a chance, an opportunity to get a look at another position. Sometimes they're a little too eager and maybe not ready for that change. So you see a lot of different things down at the Senior Bowl. It's a really fun week and a fun kind of exercise to put under the microscope.
Yeah, no question. It's one of my favorite weeks of the year. Really upset that I will not be making that trip down there this year. But we still have, like I said earlier, a lot that we're going to bring to you here on the Journey to the Draft podcast throughout the course of the week next week. Now, that being said, Ben, for the last time in a couple weeks, I wanted to be able to go through a mock draft with you. And this week, we are going to take on Seth Golina's mock draft from Pro Football Focus. Just was updated this past week after the divisional round. And since we just finished the quote-unquote divisional round of the playoffs, well, look, this is a podcast that promotes unity and togetherness. I wanted to first take a moment. Just let's pick 6 selections from Seth's mock draft that we feel could be the most divisive by the team's fan base. So divisional round, divisive picks. That's my little bit of a stretch here. But I want to go, what are the most divisive selections that the team's fan bases would be a little bit up in arms about if they were in fact the selection? We'll go through 6 picks here. Ben, I'll let you kick things off.
Well, let's just have a little fun with the first one because I think there's a pretty clear cut through and through choice for this most divisive pick. And it's got to be number 20 Chicago Bears taking a receiver that is not in this draft class. Just messing with Seth a little bit. Chris Olave decided to go back for his senior year. We're all super excited. Opportunity to be wide receiver 1 next year. Certainly had that back end of round 1 draft slot. So Seth Golina putting him to 20 to the Bears, probably an hour or 2 before Olave officially decided to go back to Ohio State, but just having a little fun with that pick.
Yeah, that's no question. And look, with Olave, we didn't talk about that earlier this week. A huge decision, certainly by him to be able to go back. But you look at the ascension that Devonta Smith had this year, where he was, hey, maybe he's a first round pick, maybe he's not. Last year at this time, and all of a sudden now he's going to be a lock certainly for the top 10 in this 2021.
I mean, that's the mold you got to figure that he's looking at and saying Devonta was probably receiver 6, 7, 8 going into the season, and now he's looking like receiver 1 or 2. That's a lot of $1 million, extra in your pocket. So Olave never going to fault a kid for wanting to go back and finish his college career.
Yeah, and I'm not even saying that that's like the prime motivation, but one of the certainly some of the things that are in his mind when he makes that decision to go back to school for his final year. Let's go to mine. I'll actually go with one of his teammates. I'm going to look at the Baltimore Ravens, who were ousted this past week in the divisional round, and Seth has them taking guard Wyatt Davis from Ohio State. And the reason why I think that would be seen as a little bit of an uproar there, look, Baltimore, that they believe in building through the trenches, right? This is a Baltimore style of pick, but in terms of what the fans and me, what would the media react to? I think when you look at the Baltimore Ravens right now, people are going to be clamoring for more offensive weapons. In terms of trying to get Lamar Jackson some more help opposite Marquise Brown. Whether it's a running back who can make some catches out of the backfield, whether it's another game breaking tight end down the seam, or some wide receiver help out in the perimeter. If they were to come back and go with the guard, I feel like that would be met with a little bit of not as much fanfare as what one would expect. And Wyatt Davis, while he's a good player, I think there will be some questions about whether or not he's a first round caliber player when it's all said and done, but certainly a talented player nonetheless.
Well, the last 2 years they've taken Dobbins, they got Mark Andrews, you got Hollywood Brown, you took Duvernay and Prochet in the draft, you got Miles Boykin. Seems like there's a lot of weapons around Lamar. It's a kind of a divisive topic on where the Ravens should go in the draft and whether it should be some help to Lamar or maybe one of those blue collar nuts and bolts in the trenches type of picks.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a team that's talked about a lot, certainly over the next few months. Yeah. And those positions in particular, I think will be coming under the microscope a little bit. What's your?
I think Wyatt's the only interior offensive lineman in his first round mock here. That's centers and guards, but might as well keep it in the interior group because there's only one interior defensive lineman. And I think we both were a little surprised to see this. Not the big love of Davion Nixon at Iowa, who seems to have been in a lot of first rounds, but Christian Barmore coming back in the first round with a vengeance, all the way up to the number 7th pick to the Detroit Lions. Very reminiscent of a Nick Fairley type of selection there. I know Seth gives a lot of credence to Aaron Donald. Yep. And that's that type of mold and projection. But you have to figure Lions fans are, you're not choosing your quarterback of the future. You're not choosing a sexy receiver to maybe have a swan song season with Matthew Stafford, like a Waddle or Smith or somebody like that. No stud edge rusher, no tackle, to pair with a Taylor Decker or to get the future. I just don't think Barmore is going to be the sexiest and most exciting pick for the Detroit Lions fans.
Yeah, I think that'll be, he's a player I feel, when we talked about him back in the summer, it was all about what he could be, what that upside that he could reach, because he was a backup a year ago. We saw him in flashes for Alabama, and the flashes were outstanding because he got a bunch of upperclassmen ahead of him on the depth chart. He would come in, whether it was high leverage situations or just late in games during garbage time, and he would look outstanding. Now you saw him this year as a full-time player. You've said it, watching the film every single week, that it kind of took him a couple of weeks, or really a couple of months to get to full speed, and he played his best football in the final month of the season. When you look at the playoff games, you look at the SEC title, you look down the stretch in the regular season. So which version of Christian Barmore are you getting? Are you getting what you saw in the first 2/3 of the season, or in that final stretch? If you were banking on the upside coming into the year and you really, really like Christian Barmore, I'm one of those people, and then you go back and you see what he did down the stretch, I'll be interested to see how people value him because, coming into the season, I was extremely high on his film. I'm excited to kind of do a deeper dive into what he put on tape here in 2020. But really
real quick, Fran, just Seth noted some of the connecting of the dots with the new GM, Brad Holmes, coming from the Rams, a guy that was willing to pull the trigger on an interior defensive lineman and Aaron Donald years earlier. So just connecting the dots. And that's a big part of this draft cycle and doing these mocks is knowing the styles, the trends, and the positional fits of the GMs and the schemes heading in there.
So when I kind of came up with the idea of doing the divisive picks, I was looking at it. I'm like, all right, well, what are the kinds of players that are taken that usually generate, not a lot of high grades from fans and from media because it's not the sexy selection. And, I go with Wyatt Davis with my first one, and I stayed along the offensive line. You and I both believe you build through the trenches. That is the best way to go. I'm just going purely off of how would fans and media respond to the pick. And I'm looking at the Indianapolis Colts, and I'm going to look at their left tackle selection here in Brady Christensen, a guy that I know you've studied. He's the blindside protector for Zach Wilson out there at BYU. But I think, look, obviously Anthony Costanzo retiring. There's going to be that question about who is going to take up that mantle as the left tackle there for the Colts. Is Brady Christensen the guy? Maybe we'll see after a few weeks here, how his stock is affected over the course of the remainder of the pre-draft process. But he would be certainly right now, if the draft were today and Brady Christensen was our first round pick, my guess, that would be a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah, he's a really good player. He's a good zone blocking tackle. I think he's a better run blocker than pass pro. Similar type of undersized mold to a Dylan Raduns coming out of North Dakota State. But that's the fourth tackle off the board. You got Penny Sewell, Rashawn Slater, Darisaw, and Christensen going 21. That leaves the second round of Eichenberg, Alex Leatherwood, Tevin Jenkins. I don't think the position is going to disappoint Colts fans as much as the selection.
That's the name. Yep.
Yes, no question. I think there's a couple other tackles that are great ahead. I think Christensen's a through and through day 2 pick is going to be a nice player. I just think that's a little bit rich at the moment. Some of the other notes here. How about number 4 here to the Atlanta Falcons, linebacker Micah Parsons.
This was an interesting one.
In a similar mold that I kind of gave the sentiment about the Detroit Lions. No quarterback of the future, no pass rusher of the future, nobody to pair with a Julio Jones or an exciting weapon to maybe have that swan song with Matthew Ryan. A lot of this kind of philosophical approach with these aging quarterbacks are, do you move on or do you try to surround them and help them? So what you do with Matthew Stafford, Matt Ryan, some of these veterans, I think is going to be really interesting in this offseason. Micah Parsons, outstanding football player, outstanding athlete. I think any defensive coordinator would love to plug them in the middle of their defense, Fran. But a linebacker, 4th overall pick, that's a philosophical approach that a lot of front offices and GMs don't believe in. It's a lot like that running back position, that linebacker position early, but not addressing some of those cornerstone positions that it seems like the Atlanta Falcons really need at the moment. I don't think that pick is really going to excite a lot of Falcons fans, despite getting a really good football player.
I think that the conversation when it comes to linebackers going that high in the draft, because, obviously you look at the physical tools for Parsons and his upside. I think that's certainly, that brings the guy into that discussion, right? When he's that kind of a freak athlete, that kind of physical specimen. Where I think the value comes when you're saying, okay, am I going to take a linebacker in the first round or even in the top half of round 1? They've got to be the field general. They've got to be the quarterback of the defense. And if you think that Parsons can be that, with what he's got from a physical tool standpoint, that's what we had that conversation, with Devin White, with Devin Bush. Certainly we talked about that with the Oklahoma kid last year, Kenneth Murray, with what he brought to the table. I mean, coming on campus as an 18-year-old and taking over that Oklahoma defense as a true freshman. Yeah, like that stands out. If you think that Micah Parsons can be that, then I think you're talking about him in the top half of round 1. If you don't think that he's going to be that guy and he's just going to be, your weak side linebacker, play sideline to sideline, then I do wonder if he's going to get selected that high. But I think it's certainly going to be a fun discussion leading up over the next month here. I'm going to go with one of his teammates with my final selection, and that's going to be Jason Oweh, the pass rusher from the Penn State Nittany Lions, a guy that, like Barmore, I'm extremely high on his physical tools. To me, was one of the most impressive defensive linemen I watched all summer long, going back and watching him last year. Again, like Barmore, he was a backup for Penn State. They had those upperclassmen ahead of him last year. He's got the other senior on the other side, Shaka Toney. Oweh comes out this year. He's got size. He's got power, explosive first step. He can turn the corner. Just all the traits you're looking for, not just speed, but power and the ability to run through blocks. The question you had, he had no sacks this year, despite all those traits and being a full-time player this year, did not once come up with a sack. Now, sacks are a fickle stat in my mind. I do agree with that. I think there's something to be said for that. That being said, there are going to be questions about it. How can you take a pass rusher who had 0 sacks in his final season? It was an abridged season, a unique set of circumstances, no question. But I think anybody that takes Oweh, that's going to be the dark cloud. That's going to be the first thing talked about when the GM and the head coach take the stand, at the podium, after that selection. The first question is going to be, what did you think about him and his lack of production this year? So I think that's why he'll be kind of a divisive player. None of these pass rushers in this class come without warts. I think there's going to be questions about all of them, but Oweh, with the lack of production, I feel like that's going to be the one that people cling to most.
Do you think there's a couple selections that fans are going to just be a little bit turned off, that they're going to the defensive side of the ball as opposed to this new influx of light up the scoreboard, put your track team on the football field, points? You see towards the end of round 1 with a lot of playoff contending teams, linebacker to New Orleans, edge rusher to Tampa Bay, edge rusher to Buffalo, edge rusher to Kansas City. I wonder how a lot of those fan bases are going to view maybe the not so sexy defensive selection as opposed to that weapon for their quarterback or that exciting running back or maybe even that tackle, which fans seem to really love because they know what it does to an offense.
Well, it's that constant battle, right? Because it's hey, are we going to try and outgun this team? Are we going to, if you're a team that's in the AFC West going up against Kansas City twice a year and know you're going to fight for them with the AFC, are we going to try and outscore them every week? Or do we have to find guys that can run with Tyreek Hill? Are we going to try and find guys that can keep Clyde Edwards-Helaire bottled up for the next 5 years? Who was the guy that's going to take down Patrick Mahomes in the backfield? Those are the conversations that are had. And obviously there are great players on both sides. How they're valued, it's going to be looked a little bit differently by all organizations.
And real quick, before we go on to the Eagles picks here, I know we talked about our divisive picks, which fan bases are going to be a little upset. Let's do a little bit of optimism as well here, because I love the 2 picks he slotted for the Jacksonville Jaguars and the new regime of Urban Myers. That's Trevor Lawrence, obviously going number 1 later in the draft. Kadarius Toney to put into that system with a Laviska Shenault already and James Robinson in the backfield. Some really nice parts out there with the receiver from LSU. DJ Shark can absolutely run. Some really nice parts. I know he's going to get Trevor Lawrence on the move. His athleticism is going to be a lot of RPOs, a lot of quick game stuff, a lot of gadget stuff with Shenault and Kadarius Toney. Easy offense for Trevor Lawrence. That's going to be a QB-friendly system, and right off the bat, a lot of weapons.
I like that. That's when you look at the weapons that they have already in place in Jacksonville, if you can get just one other to be like, that game breaker for Trevor Lawrence, I think that'll be really,
just
really
letting
attractive.
Seth know he's not going to get hate mail from every franchise. All right. Just about 22 of them.
Listen, the whole idea behind this was that when you put a mock draft out, you don't get people aren't in your mentions saying like, oh, we love this pick. It's all people complaining. So Seth should be used to it by now.
It's like reviews at restaurants. You usually only speak up when something went wrong.
Right.
You rarely speak up when things go well.
Yeah, no news is good news. I think it's certainly the axiom to use there. Real quick, let's just take a look at that Eagle selection. And I think one of the more popular picks you're going to see is going to be one of these receivers, whether it's Devonta Smith or, in this case, for the second week in a row for the mock draft that we highlight, it is the LSU wide receiver, Ja'Marr Chase. Did not play this year. Here's the blurb here from Seth. He said, I'm of the opinion that neither Carson Wentz nor Jalen Hurts is the future of the franchise, though I do think seeing who Hurts is for a whole season is the best way to go forward. You'd love for them to take a quarterback here, but that's not going to happen. The best thing is taking a receiver who can get open and catch passes, something the Eagles did not have last year. Chase is one of the more physical prospects in the draft, consistently destroyed press coverage and double teams when defenses said, hey, you know what? One guy is not enough to cover number 1. He is good. So that is the blurb from Seth Golina. So Ja'Marr Chase, great player. You and I have talked a lot about Ja'Marr Chase and what he brings. I don't know that we need to dive too deep, but I think those are going to be the popular picks for the Eagles in a lot of mock drafts. It's going to be Devonta Smith, who we'll get a chance to not see on the field, but he'll be going down to Mobile next week. And then Ja'Marr Chase out of LSU. 2 great players for sure, Ben.
Do you see any positional usage issues with Ja'Marr Chase? Because when I reflect to the previous first-round picks of the Eagles, obviously Nelson Aguilar, Jalen Reagor, a lot of question, a lot of fluidity with where they're going to be used at the next level. Obviously, Nelson went outside, inside. Reagor thought was going to be inside, used a little bit more outside last year. I think Chase is a through-and-through outside receiver, and I think that's going to let some other guys in the offense carve out their more natural role, like Reagor being used inside and things like that. I just wondering if you thought Chase was a little bit more limited or had some more diversity with where you can use him.
No, I don't think that he's limited. I think that he's a guy that's capable of winning outside the numbers and beating press coverage, being able to win in all areas. So does that mean that he can't work in the slot on occasion? No, of course not. But I think he's a guy that you could say, yeah, this guy can win outside the numbers. And that's really what it comes down to is, do you feel that this guy can win outside or not? If he can't, then he's only a slot. If he can, well, now you've got the ability to mix and match and, kind of change things up formationally. But no, I think that Ja'Marr Chase is one of those guys that can win inside or outside for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think any offense would be excited to have whether it's Ja'Marr Chase, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith. I think there's a lot of exciting talent. It's not so much who as much as get somebody to add into this offense or who's ever offense. Definitely a lot of good receivers.
No doubt. So always fun to be able to go through somebody's mock draft. We won't be doing this next week because of the Senior Bowl, but in a couple weeks, we'll be back for another standard version of Pick 6. Well, Ben, we will catch up with you early next week. For now, we're talking mock drafts. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's talk with Joe Goodberry covering the Cincinnati Bengals. Talk about what this Cincinnati team likes to do here in the NFL draft.
All 32 teams are always under construction. How are they being built? Let's check out the blueprint.
Well, here for our second edition of the Blueprint, I got to bring in a guy that knows his team inside and out. You can follow him on Twitter at Joe Goodberry. Joe, thanks so much for coming on and talking a little bit of Cincinnati Bengals with us.
Thanks for having me on, Fran. It's draft season. I think this is our wheelhouse here, so I'm happy to join you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Joe, you've covered this team, you've followed this team for a long, long time, and I want to start things off by, first thing, they have as unique a structure and approach to the NFL draft and to the offseason as anybody. I know it's evolved a little bit and become a little bit more towards the norm over the last couple of years, but I guess we could start there. What is the structure of the Bengals? Who are the guys that are the key decision makers when it comes to the Bengals and how they approach the NFL draft?
You know what? I think it's still something that we don't get enough information on as a whole. It was always Mike Brown is the GM. He's the owner. He is the final say on everything. And then Marvin Lewis was there for 16 years and slowly gained control of a lot of the decisions. And when he left, we learned that it was the children of Mike Brown, Katie Blackburn primarily, leading the charge with Duke Tobin to find the next head coach. And that was Zach Taylor. So at this point, whenever you hear of a decision, you kind of hear about a collective group of Mike Brown, Duke Tobin, Katie Blackburn, and Zach Taylor. And it makes sense. Now, Mike Brown still has the final say, as any owner does, but you do feel like Duke Tobin is acting as GM at this point and with a lot of input and say from his head coach.
Yeah, and he has certainly gotten a lot of respect from a lot of people around the league. I know when they had, even when they do like press conferences at the Combine last year, he was the one who spoke, on behalf of the Bengals. So certainly seems to be the decision maker on the personnel side to kind of keep in mind. So with that, you said, looking at this Bengals team, and I just want to ask you 3 traits or 3 trends that kind of stand out about Duke Tobin and, how we, think that he has gone on about building this team. For people out there who are trying to build a mock draft, I'll ask you for the 3, we'll kind of go one by one. What's the first one that people should know about the Bengals and the way that they want to try and build this team with Duke Tobin?
Yeah, and I keep a history of what the Bengals draft, position, size, what they're 40, if we get Wonderlic time, whatever the case may be. Anything I can find, I'll keep a chart on that. So there are trends. It's hard to find when the line is of when Duke Tobin really started making the decisions because he's been there since early 2000, I think 2001. So it's kind of like an arbitrary line that I kind of move a little bit as the trends go. But the first thing I have is the focus on skill positions, whether it be offensive and defense. I think wide receiver and corner, just the amount of premium picks they have spent, especially recently, at wide receiver, at cornerback, like I don't think you can ever take those positions off the board for the Bengals. Even after, like you look right now, they've got young guys in Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins. I think receivers should be talked about. And I think even if they were able to retain William Jackson, I think corner should be on the radar. And it's just because the Bengals keep investing in that position.
I like that. All right. So you're talking about Devonta Smith. You talk about Jamar Chase, certainly the 2 corners there, and Patrick Surtain and Caleb Farley. So something to keep in mind there for the first round. What's the second one in your mind?
For me, at receiver, keeping it there, youth, breakout age, and production. They do not draft guys that are a little bit older at receiver and that didn't produce at a young age. Now we'll go a little bit further because I know your last question's coming up and I want to save a little bit more of this data for that. So that's just a little teaser because I do think there's somebody in this top 5 or top 6, 7 that doesn't actually fit the mold.
Okay. I like it. All right. So with that in mind, let's go to the third one. What's the third one on the bucket list here?
They never draft defensive linemen in the first round. So it's a big need. I mean, and they're getting at the end of a great 10-year run of Carlos Dunlap and Geno Atkins. They traded Dunlap. Geno Atkins tried to play through a shoulder injury this year. All reports say he's probably going to be released to save some money because he's not the same guy. They're depleted on the defensive line. And Carl Lawson, their best pass rusher, is a free agent. But they just do not draft defensive line. They never have in the first round. I mean, maybe the guy you could say is David Pollock in 05, but he's kind of a tweener and they made him a linebacker right away. So, I mean, even there, it doesn't really apply. So I would say it's probably time to break that trend, but I'm not sure there's a guy worthy of it anyways.
Yeah, in this class, I would say that you're probably right on that. It'll be certainly a big projection if you're going that route early in round 1. Okay, with that in mind now, I know that it kind of, again, like you said, you kind of blur the line about when Duke Tobin started and when he really kind of took control. But are there any schools or programs that kind of come to mind at the top when you're starting to think about the coaching staffs that this staff has connections with at the college level?
It's funny because last year, one of the things about Joe Burrow was they had an assistant in that coaching staff at LSU that used to coach with the Bengals or was an assistant with the Bengals. So they were very aware of him. They knew who he was and everything behind the scenes. Now that's not normal. You have your connections around the league. You have your connections in college. It's funny. One we used to always use was Georgia.
Yep.
The Bengals, we talked about David Pollock, but they also drafted Odell Thurman in the second round that year. They drafted Geno Atkins from there.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, AJ Green and Clint Boyd from the same draft in
right,
2011, and then Sean Williams a couple years after that. It was when they went there, I felt like they were, who are they keeping their eye on? Because that guy's got a good chance to end up in Cincinnati. But now it's been a little bit more mixed, and it's been a little bit more spread open. I do think they tend to go with the big schools, though.
Yeah, that's certainly something I'm always keeping an eye on. Are these teams more or less likely to dip into the smaller school ranks outside Power 5, outside FBS? Yeah, I think the Bengals certainly a team, more so, in the bigger schools. Everyone talks about need versus best player available, and I feel like the Bengals, and this is just kind of anecdotal for me, it seems like they're a big need-based organization, almost like they go in with the checklist and say, okay, here are the things we need. Is that kind of how you see it as well? How, when you talk about need versus best player available with them?
They've done it both, and they've had some really good drafts. If you just go in the last decade, and there's been years where I think the roster was from 2011 to 2015, extremely deep and talented, and they drafted so well setting that team up. And I think when you can have a draft like 2012, let's say, where you're just going best player available throughout, and it ends up hitting for you in so many ways because the roster was so good, you would think that would be the idea right there that, okay, we need to make sure we go BPA as much as possible. But then you get to points where the Bengals don't spend a lot in free agency or don't fill holes. They'll leave one hole, maybe two holes, and they'll say, okay, we've got to get a center in this draft. And you look a few years ago, they wanted Frank Ragnow. I mean, it was no secret. Yeah. They had a card filled out with his name on it. The Lions stole it, in that last minute. And they said, okay, well, we need a center, so let's take the next one and Billy Price. That can come back and bite you. When you just really key on one position and you don't really expand your horizon. It has also hurt them in the past when they have targeted players going into day 2 or day 3. So they said, okay, we need a defensive end. We like Will Clark in the 3rd round before they even get there. Same draft. Well, we like Russell Bodine in the 4th round. Let's get those guys because we need to fill these spots. You get there, and now in hindsight, we can always say, man, there were so many better players on the board, but they had to get those positions, or at least they felt they had to, and it didn't work out for them.
Yeah, it's every team has those kind of examples to certainly look back on. Now, kind of what you alluded to earlier, I want to ask you: are there players that are being mocked to the Bengals right now that you feel make a lot of sense based off some of the things that we've talked about already in this conversation?
Of course, Penei Sewell would be awesome. I mean, just for a need position and having a guy that's that unanimously ranked high, it would be a home run pick, I think, for them. But I also think Jamar Chase makes a lot of sense in terms of you may like Boyd and you may like Higgins, and I do, but I'm not sure either one is that number one type of guy, right? The guy that's going to run every single route from every position on the field and dominate. I think Jamar Chase can do that. And last time we saw him, he was 19 years old. And you got to think in 2-3 years, where's his physical ability going to be? I think there's a good chance he fits everything they look for at the wide receiver position. The guy, though, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And it's Devonta Smith. And I know we're talking about like a tremendous season, Heisman year. I mean, this guy looks tremendous, but he's on the smaller side. And I think every team's going to knock him for that. But for the Bengals, breakout age is huge for them in drafting receivers. They have not spent a high pick on a receiver that hasn't had an early breakout. Now, Devonta Smith was buried on the depth chart in Alabama, right? So that's going to happen. And he had good production his sophomore year, but everyone at Alabama was also producing that season. For me, when you look at it, and even last year, we're like, all right, the Bengals want a receiver in round 2. Who are they going to take? They take T. Higgins with a 96 percentile breakout. They take John Ross a couple years ago, 96 percentile breakout. They've really taken 2 guys only since 2010, and they've drafted about 14 receivers that were under 50%, and they were 6th and 7th round picks. Mm-hmm. So to think Devonta Smith, he's going to come in about the 25th percentile for breaking out at a young age, it would be off the charts for them to make that pick.
See, and this is why I love bringing people on that specialize in one team over another, because there are all these different strategies get talked about, from a universal standpoint, right? Macro view, looking at all 32 teams. But all of these decision makers are going to prioritize certain things over another. You talk about age and breakout and, best player available versus drafting for need. You can go right down the line, but all of these teams are going to feel really, really strongly about a couple of them, core philosophies that they stand by. And so for you to having done that research on the breakout age, I think is really fascinating. Really quick, a couple guys I wanted to kind of follow up on. Kyle Pitts, I feel like, is an interesting name that everybody loves universally, in the draft community, but everyone's having trouble kind of placing where he could go in a mock draft. Do you feel that the Bengals is a likely landing spot? Is he a guy that you think that they would consider?
I do. I mean, they have taken 2 first-round tight ends in the recent history with Jermaine Gresham and with Tyler Eifert. They did take a second-round pick on Drew Sample just a couple years ago, so they're not afraid to spend at tight end and spend high, maybe a little more high than most teams do. I think the hard part is because we can talk about Pitts forever. He's a freak, man. He's going to be a guy that you want to give 120 targets to. He looks like Darren Waller out there. You want that guy in your team. Where's the value, right? Yep. Can you make the case for tight end when it seems like a lot of these guys, you take the most athletic guy in round 3, 4, 5, you got a good chance he may develop in 2 or 3 years. And that's the thing about tight end, right? It takes 3, 4, sometimes even in that second contract until you see that guy at his prime. And it's an often injured position. Can you afford to take a guy with that type of risk at that position? Those guys get beat up. So I do think if I had it right now, I would have Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase, and then Pitts maybe as the third option. But maybe that's in a trade down scenario where you get to 8, 9, 10 because somebody wants to come up and get that third quarterback.
Well, we've got a lot of time to kind of figure all that stuff out before the draft. Joe, thanks so much for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Thanks, friend.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, excited to welcome in here to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA, a longtime NFL scout, has worked with a number of NFL teams, including the Philadelphia Eagles, and now he serves as really one of the main scouting consultants for the East-West Shrine Bowl. I want to welcome in Dan Shonka. Dan, thanks for joining us here on the show.
Hey, great to be with you. And it's unfortunately, Fran, we don't have a game this year, and we had a great one last year. But I guess a lot of pains for a lot of teams this year.
No question. And it's one of my favorite trips every year. I've been going every spring, every winter, I should say, really going back almost a decade now. And it's one of my favorite trips. And it's a shame, obviously, we'll not be able to attend this year with no game taking place. But that being said, before we get into some of the players that would have had the ability to really kind of stand out down in St. Petersburg, I want to kind of ask you, what was it like putting the roster together this year? And I know it's still kind of happening. There's still players that are accepting because you've got some guys that are opting to go back to school next year. How has this whole process been for you compared to a normal year?
Right. No, it's a big change because I tell you what, Fran, from our first invites that went out, there's close to 30 guys now that have gone back to school, and so we're still at, we added some guys the other day that have come out that we didn't know, if they were going to opt out or not. So anyway, we ended up adding, another group, and we're still going to add some more as we go here, I think. So because we'll have Zoom meetings next week. Can I get rid of it? Okay, excuse me. I don't mean to. Oh, I guess. Okay. Anyway. Oh, there we go. Okay. I had the X in front of your face.
Oh, no worries.
Now I can see your shiny face. Okay. But anyway, we're going to have meetings next week. So, we're going to add some more guys, and, the official day for people to opt out is next Monday. So, we might have some more then, but anyway, it was different. That's for sure. Adding and subtracting guys.
Well, let's go kind of position by position here. And obviously with no game taking place, a lot of these guys won't have that ability to kind of stand out. I can think of case by case over the years where you see guys really help themselves, whether it's in practice or in the actual game. And so if you want to just name a guy or two that you felt really would have had an opportunity to shine and kind of give them the spotlight here on the show, I'd love to start at quarterback, and a few big names there. Who's a guy at quarterback that you feel would have really had the opportunity to show his wares to NFL teams down in St. Petersburg this year?
I tell you, Fran, a guy that I like is Dustin Crum out of Kent State, who, he's going to return to school though. Okay. So one way or another, but he's going to return to school, but he had really good accuracy this year and really happy with the way that his season went, but he's going to go back. So now another guy that I mean, he was hot and cold this year, but I certainly liked him was Zach Smith out of Tulsa, because if you look at the second half of games, he looked really good. I mean, he's a little bigger than a Brett Favre, for instance. He's 6'0", 240. He's about 227. Threw the ball really well. But you look the first half of games, you go, God, why did he get invited to the game? And then you look the second half of his games, you go, man, that kid's pretty good, because he's got his feet under him. He looks good. He's got a good arm. He's got a rocket. He can throw it, or he can take something off of it. He's just inconsistent, but what we bring to the game are guys that are fighting for backup jobs and are developmental players, and Zach, I think, could be a really good one.
Dan,
he's out
the
of
running
Tulsa,
back,
by the way. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Dan, the running back position, I've always really kind of liked some of the guys that you've brought down. And from that initial list of invites, I mean, Khalil Herbert was a guy that really, really intrigued me down, at Virginia Tech. And you look at Spencer Brown from UAB, and Chris Evans in Michigan missed so much time over the last couple of years, but came back and made some plays this year as a senior. Running backs don't usually get that opportunity to flash in practice. It's more about what they can do at the game. Is there a guy that you feel like would have really helped himself on Saturday here down at East West Week?
Well, I think Trey Regas from Louisiana would have been one, because he's a big, strong guy. Of course, Trey Sermon, everybody saw what he could do the last couple weeks before the national championship game. And we thought he might be a little sleeper there playing behind Master Teague for a while. But we liked him at Oklahoma. But, now he with that shoulder, he wouldn't have been coming anyway. But, I think, like you're right, Chris Evans from Michigan. He was out last year for academics and things, but he's a smart kid and all that. It was just one of those things he didn't get taken care of. But again, a 220-pound back that we think, could have shined real easily. We like the Jared Dokes kid out of Cincinnati. I think that he's a 230-pound back that, reminds us a little bit of James Robinson, and then you got teams like those smaller running backs like Marable and from Coastal Carolina that's really quick and slippery and can kind of make something out of nothing at times. And he's a 200-pounder. And I would have loved to have seen him, butt heads against some of these guys, but I think we had a good group of, as you know, since you've been down there for 10 years, you can see a lot of those backs that go late or free agents they're on rosters and are playing on Sunday, and I think we got a good group of those guys again.
Yeah, you mentioned James Robinson. Obviously, did a great job during the game last year and went on to be a rookie starter, one of the best rookies in the NFL this year. And I want to make that transition to wide receiver. The Eagles made a draft pick on day 3 from last year's game, and that was John Hightower out of Boise State. Looking at the receiver group from this year, I mean, there are a bunch of guys that really kind of intrigued me, and I'm going to kind of add, some of these guys have been making plays. I feel like for 7 years, I've been watching Amir Smith-Marset at Iowa or Tyler Vaughn's at USC, but a bunch of intriguing names. Was there a guy that you feel would have really helped himself over the course of the week during one-on-ones or just throughout the rest of practice?
The thing, I think Ernezi from North Carolina State, strong hands, a big guy with, a very physical player. Of course, Cornell Powell from Clemson, liked a lot of things that he did. I think Jonathan Adams is another guy that he would have, shown what he could do. I think Raleigh Webb out of the Citadel, another guy that's 6'2.5", 220, put up big yards in a running offense, So I think that, he would have been, but I think one of the real sleepers out of this whole bunch is probably Brandon Smith out of Iowa. Here's a guy that's 6'0", 2'4", 222, and is a heck of an athlete. When he goes to the combine, people are going to say, wow, where did he come from? He was the other guy at Iowa, and very physical, lays out for the ball, good blocker. You're going to see him on Sunday somewhere.
You mentioned earlier Trey Sermon from Ohio State. I know on that initial list of invites, Luke Farrell, the tight end from the Buckeyes, was also on that group. Was he the guy that would have given you the most juice at the tight end spot? Who were you really excited about from this tight end group that would have had a really great opportunity down there this week?
Well, him, obviously, but then also I like Nick Eubanks. I mean, Eubanks, he from Michigan, they played with 3 or 4 tight ends his whole career there. So they was always rotating in and out. And so, he's a Florida kid. It'd have been great for him playing from his family, but I liked Nick Eubanks. Obviously, Noah Gray. I think Noah Gray from Duke, excellent receiver, very competitive. I think that, now Nick Muse and Chase from South Carolina and Chase Allen from Iowa State, they're both returning to school. So they'd have been fun guys to watch, because Nick was Tanner Muse is his brother. Right. And, that family can really run. And I wanted to see him be able to run down there. So, but I think that, you kind of hit it on the head there. I like Sean Byer from Iowa, a guy that he was the rotation tight end in there. But again, I watched him since high school. Terrific athlete, runs in the 4.6s, catches everything. John Rain from Northwestern, who was down at, you remember, he was the backup down at Florida Atlantic behind the tight end that went to Cleveland last year. But anyway, when that tight end didn't play in the bowl game, Rain did, and he looked spectacular. So he transferred to Northwestern as a grad transfer, but I wanted to see him too. But John Rain from Northwestern. So Sean Byer and Rain and Eubanks and Gray and quite a group.
I love every practice whenever there's a chance for the O-line, D-line one-on-ones heading down that way. I remember, some of the best guys that have been through the East Way, Poona Ford a couple years ago, Teron Armstead when he was coming out of Arkansas, Pine Bluff, just so many linemen able to come down and really, really help themselves. Staying on the offensive side, a bunch of names that really kind of intrigued me. You talk about Myron Cunningham, Arkansas, and I know that Brendan James from Nebraska is a guy that some people like. Carson Green, that A&M offensive line, a lot of people really loved watching that group play this year. Is there a guy or two that you felt really would have helped themselves, especially in that one-on-one portion during practice?
Yeah, I think, Tommy Doyle from Miami of Ohio would be in that group. A very athletic guy. He's 6'8", 325, moves really well, very athletic. In fact, I can't remember, but I think he might even made Feldman's freak list. He's a really athletic guy that is a developmental tackle. I like Jared Williams from the University of Miami. Liked him a lot. I think as a developmental guy from Illinois State, Drew Himmelman. He's 6'9", 317, but he can bend. That's the big thing. He's a smart guy. He was one of the, finalists for the academic Heisman, the Campbell Award, so he's really a smart guy, and he's going to play this spring. But I think that he hopes he can still get drafted, this year. But with this not having a game, so he was able to sign up with this. But I think the big thing is we had a lot of athletic guys. I think Hutcherson, now he was on from South Carolina, the guard, he was on that freak list. I mean, he's just a power pack, kind of looks like if you remember Owanu from last year up at New England, he's kind of like that. But I don't know if his arms are as long or his hands are as big as Owanu's, but he might look a little bit more like Kevin Dotson, maybe, but that kind of guy. So I think, he's another guy that certainly would like to see him. But it's Stone Forsythe from Florida. Again, a long guy, 6'7", 330, moves his feet well, very athletic. They can bend. And that's the thing we really look at these guys of, hey, can you bend? I mean, you got to be able to bend, and let's see. But those guys, I think, would be would be real interesting to a guy that I like, and he's not getting a lot of play anywhere, but Grant Herman's from Purdue, a smart guy, former wrestler, 4-year starter there. Just plays square, does a lot of really good things with his feet, doesn't ever get crossed over. He keeps his hands high. Technically, he's pretty good, but so Grant Herman's would be another guy I'd like to look at.
And I love that you alluded to a couple of rookie starters in Kevin Dotson with the Steelers and Onwenu with the Patriots just at last year's game along the offensive line. Same question for you on the defensive side. In those one-on-ones, I know from the initial invite list, there were some All-Americans in there, Tyron Jackson from Coastal Carolina. There's guys that have been 4-year starters, and Victor Dumekije from Duke, and guys that just came on the scene this year as first-year starters. Guys like Dalen Hayes from Notre Dame, but you got the big nose tackles and Jordan Scott from Oregon and TJ Slayton in Florida. Are there guys that you look at in that group and say, like, man, this guy's got the ability to make that next step and maybe be an early contributor in the NFL?
Yeah, I think that one thing you'd notice, Fran, that it's not a great defensive tackle group, but it's a great nose tackle group. If you're a 3-4 team, there's guys that big wide body guys like the Slayton kid out of Florida. He's 355 pounds, and you see Tonga from BYU, 325 pounds. Jordan Scott, short, explosive guy. I say short. He looks short. He's 6'1", 325, but he looks like the refrigerator, but he blocks out the sun. And so I think that, there's a lot of 3-4 type tackles out there this year, or nose tackles. And, I like all those guys. I think that we had Devontae Wyatt, but he's going back to school, to Georgia, which kind of surprised me in a way, but liked him. These guys are just, they're two gap guys, they're not for everybody, but they're going to play for somebody.
Sure. And then you get to the linebacker level. There were a couple of Ohio State kids on there that I feel like everybody knows. Pete Werner, Tuff Borland, but you go to Patty Fisher, who's been making plays for Northwestern for years and years. I'm a huge fan of LSU's Jacoby Stevens and his ability to make that transition to linebacker at the next level. Are there other guys from that group, or even from that select group of guys I just named that really give you a lot of excitement in terms of making that transition to the NFL?
Yeah, I tell you what, Fran, I really like Pete Werner from Ohio State. Now, people thought I was full of beans last year when I loved Jordan Fuller, and in fact, an agent called me and I said, well, he's going to go to Senior Bowl. And he said, no, they haven't invited him. I said, are they crazy? I'd have called Nagy myself. I said, this kid's a great football player. Of course, he started for the Rams this year, at safety. Pete Werner, I feel the same way about. Pete he can cover. He can run, and he's a guy that when I talk about the Big Ten guys, and I kind of get kidded about this a little bit because I see all their films. I see all the Big Ten film, and I study these guys and grade them. And like you said, Patty Fisher, but you saw next to Patty Fisher was 51, Gallagher. And Gallagher, we invited him the other day. Just, I don't know. He's going to go to camp as a free agent, but you know what? The guy's smart. He's instinctive. He's always there, and he might end up making it as a core special team player. But anyway, going back to Pete Werner, he's kind of like what I felt about Fuller last year, and hey, he's 6'2.5", he's 242. He runs in the 4.6s. He's smart. He's instinctive. He never came off the field. People nowadays, you've got to be able to run and cover to be a linebacker in the NFL. And you alluded to Jacoby Stevens, because I think that's what ultimately he's going to be. Yep. But, I would have loved to see Pete too.
Yeah, Pete, we've been talking about him a lot on the podcast. He allows them to play as much base as they do, even against 3 receiver sets, because of his ability to play in the slot and play in space. A really fun player to study and project. Let's get to the secondary. We'll talk corner first. A bunch of guys I know from Pac-12 that were slated to head down to St. Pete, but just looking at this corner group overall, any names that really stand out to you?
Well, obviously, Paulson Adebo from Stanford, he's a big guy, and he's played well for a couple years now. And, you kind of always want those big corners, but hey, if there's not big corners, you got to go with what's there. And, there's guys like Lorenzo Burns out of Arizona, good player. Brandon Eccles from Kentucky is another one. They'll be probably nickel guys, but love two of them at Arizona State, but they're both going back. Jack Jones and Chase Lucas. I like Coney Durr from Minnesota. He's going back, but that brings us to the other guy, Benjamin St. Juste, that, he's a Canadian kid that played 2 years at Minnesota, transferred in there from Michigan, but he kind of reminds me now, since you were down there a few years ago, if you remember Trey Flowers, when he was, and he's been starting for Seattle. He kind of reminds me of Trey a little bit because he's a long guy, 6'3", 205. And another guy that he reminds me of is, Faison was probably could run faster probably than Benjamin, but he's in that group. And I'll tell you, and I don't know if he's going to play or if he's coming back for sure, but I like the Mac McClain kid out of North Carolina A&T. I tell you what, Fran, when you talk about stick your foot in the ground and drive on a ball, this guy might be as good as anybody. It's amazing how quick he reacts. He sticks that foot in, boom, he's right there. So, but that's Mac McClain out of North Carolina A&T.
I love some of these names that you're able to throw out there. The last position we'll go to is just safety, and there are a few guys that I kind of like in terms of projecting the NFL. I feel like Reed Blankenship from Middle Tennessee State. Again, we might be talking about as a Pro Bowl starter for years and years, but a guy I just felt to be really, really reliable watching him over the course of his career. Is there a guy at safety that really stands out to you based off film study?
Well, I know why you like Reed Blankenship is just because he's really consistent. Here's a guy that's done it for 4 years. He's smart. Guys like that play. And in fact, I'm trying to think of Mike's name because you might remember him in Philadelphia when we were there. We had that good secondary with Bobby Taylor and
Mike Zordich.
That's it. Yeah. He's kind of like Mike Zordich. He gets
like
you
it.
Lined up. Mike was probably the least athletic of all those guys, but he was just smart. He got everybody lined up, and but Mike was outstanding. But I'd say that Reed's kind of like him. J.R. Pace from Northwestern had really a strong year, about 6'1", 200 pounds, and he really did some good things. There were about 4 of those guys that are coming back, like Brisker from Penn State. I liked him, but he's going back. And I like Hamlin out of Pittsburgh, but of course LeCount, he had the car injury and stuff, but we don't know what he's going to do. And then but Tarek Thompson from San Diego State is another guy that I wanted to see. And as you know, if you ever track them and you've been there, like I said, for about 10 years, a lot of our guys, the secondary guys, you can almost lock them in playing in the NFL next year. Yep. Whoever is in our game, they're there. And, now Kobe Bryant from Cincinnati is going back to school. I love, of course, he was a corner, but, I think, let's see, there's a couple of other guys. I tell you, strong would be like Derek Forrest from Cincinnati. Really wanted to see him. Derek DeLuca from Charlotte, again, a strong safety that, these guys made over 100 tackles in 1 year, in the last couple of years of their school. And then I like Zach McPherson, a corner out of Texas Tech, who was at Penn State, if you recall. Then he transferred out there. But Zach is a terrific football player as a corner, and would have, loved to see him. But those couple safeties that I mentioned, I think are going to be guys that are going to be on rosters.
Oh, Dan, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and giving us some insight into some of the guys that, we're going to miss out on seeing in person down in St. Pete. Hope to run into you next year, 2022. Hopefully the world is in a much better place by that point. But Dan, thanks so much for joining us here on the Journey of the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
You betcha, Fran. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks to Dan Shonka, Joe Goodberry, and of course to Ben Fennell. Great episode here. Really great info from all three of those guests. Hope you guys enjoyed this week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Next week, we are going to be loaded. We've got a daily podcast, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Every single day, we're going to be bringing you action from the Senior Bowl. We've got a lot of great interviews already locked and loaded for next week. You do not want to miss anything. Make sure you are subscribed right here to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Raise a glass to that comforting feeling of an Eagles touchdown with the all-new Broad & Pattison wine collection created in partnership with Wink. Featuring a Cabernet, a Rosé, and a Chardonnay. Broad & Pattison wines are the perfect pairing for any occasion. Now you can bring the sweet taste of victory with you to a dinner with friends or to the tailgate with your game day crew. Purchase online today at PhiladelphiaEagles.com/wine to stock up and have Broad & Pattison delivered right to your door. A portion of proceeds from every bottle benefit Eagles Autism Foundation.